Hey everybody, welcome to this week's Q&As. I got to record these on Wednesday or early morning just because my schedule got all turned around this week, but I think there's a couple of questions, so let's jump in and see what we got. First up, Faithful wanted to follow up on the problem they've been having with getting their Mister connected via direct video through a digital to analog converter going to some CRTs. And the two CRTs are a 36-inch consumer grade Toshiba. It's one of those 100 hertz models, but it doesn't accept 31 kilohertz. So that could play into a factor here. I don't really think so, but let's just continue. And also a PVM20M2 MDE that has both RGBS and component video inputs via BNC. And while I absolutely read all of Faithful's post, and in fact, there's a bunch of long posts this week that I saw, so I read every word, just in the respect of everybody who's listening's time. I try to summarize and skip to the end. But it seems like when Faithful uses the time sleuth, 288p and 576i won't work. They haven't tested 240p or 480i, so PAL resolutions work, but NTSC doesn't. However, switching over to 720p and 1080p also does work with the DAC, which makes sense because these DACs, even the cheap ones, tend to work with 720p and 1080p, and they just removed 15 kilohertz support. Faithful tried a bunch of different settings in the Mr. INI file, also changed the static wallpaper to one of the other ones, which is always worth a try, and that was a great tip that somebody else sent in. But they're not having any other luck still. So my guess, and I think this might be my last suggestion for you until I'm kind of out of ideas, is try setting the rest of the Mr. INI to PAL modes. I believe there's a couple of different settings. You have to put NTSC mode to 1, menu_PAL to 1, and then read lines 119 to 130 of the Mr. INI file and see if you want to mess with the video modes as well. I don't think you need to. I think you should just start with those two first ones and see what happens, because it could be a scenario in which the equipment you got is PAL equipment and you try, and 1080p and 720p are more forgiving on modern displays, but the older SD resolutions are not. Now, that's in my experience. Maybe that's just the 20 displays that I've used, and that's 1%, and the rest of them are fine, and I'm sending you down a wild goose chase. But a free solution that'll take 2 minutes of your time when you're this deep into it, I don't think you're going to mind, Faithful. So try those two settings and just kind of read through the other ones and see what happens. But at that point, I don't really know what else it could be. The other things you could try, I guess, is you said you have a power supply rated at about an amp. So you could definitely try a better power supply. And in fact, too many amps is always much better than too little, because power supplies only draw the amperage they need. So if you need 5 volts, 3 amps, and you have a power supply rated at 5 volts, a million amps, it's only going to draw 3 of that million. Whereas the voltage is different. Voltage is always being pushed down the line. So I know that's a pretty basic and not so accurate visualization, but it also kind of works. So I'm going to stick with that one still. But yeah, those are the only two other things or 3, I guess. Start with those 2 Mr. INI settings, maybe read those other lines and check the other settings and try a different power supply. Please let us know what happens, but this is a weird one. I certainly haven't seen anything this complicated just to get working on CRTs in a while. Next up, Dustin Mattison wants to know if I could recommend an inexpensive portable spotlight for use with their comedy shows, or basically any gigs, live events, streaming events, retro gaming events, whatever else. They did a bar gig in the middle of nowhere, Kentucky, and it was a 30-minute drive just to the nearest gas station, and the lighting was awful. So here's where I might not be a help to you, because when you have streaming events and a bunch of different stuff going on, very often you have the lights of the displays, and you really just need to light the person for, who's gaming, the competitor in the tournament. So those portable little, like Elgato lights and stuff are usually fine for that, because you really just want to illuminate the person's face. You also have the lights of the displays coming at you. So for you, I don't know, that's a much harder one. It wouldn't need to be battery powered, I guess, because there's a gig with plugs, which that would be an issue with a lot of streaming events. Because while, of course, you're going to have plugs if you have game consoles and monitors, you already have a lot of stuff plugged in. And sometimes you might just be going, depending on the stream, you might be bouncing between different stations to stream which event is going on. So those battery powered lights on tripods are great. But for your gig, honestly, this is Amazon Home Depot, Walmart, and I even AliExpress and Temu and whatever else. I would just look up whatever is the cheapest possible ones, get a couple of extension cords, and get some kind of surge protection. So not the $3, quote unquote surge protectors, which are really just AC splitters. Try to get something with a little bit of surge protection actually in it so it'll trip if something happens, because the cheaper you go with stuff like that, the more chance of fire. And that's not what you want to deal with at any live event. So this is, for me personally, I think many people might have the opposite opinion and just think, no, you should invest in some really good lighting. My view on this is when you're carrying stuff from gig to gig to gig, as I've done many times, whether it's for retro gaming or music, things get dinged up very often. And sometimes things just get broken no matter how careful you are. So I would rather invest in, 20, $30 for a good surge protection box that could trip off if something happens, even if somebody spills a beer on it or whatever, right? Just have some kind of good breaker thing that you plug it into just to kill the power if there's any shorts. And then I would get the cheapest lights possible, because that little breaker box thing, you could just make sure to put that on the floor of your car and you're fine carrying it back and forth. But the big lights, they're much more of a chance of something breaking. But if anybody has any questions, because while Dustin's questions are generally about the comedy shows that he's been putting on, all of these questions completely pertain to live events in the retro gaming and just regular gaming world as well. So I enjoy answering them just because not only do I get to talk about a bunch more useless knowledge that I've gained over the years, but I do think people listening are probably going to go, I'm never going to put on a comedy show, but that little streaming event I had, yeah, it was hard to see the players' faces. So that's cool. I'll get a battery-powered portable light and a tripod. And so keep them coming, Dustin. They're good. I especially like it when there's a lot of crossover, but always happy to help. And yeah, that's definitely my suggestion. Go cheap on the lighting, decent on the extension cords, which aren't expensive anyway, and just invest in some kind of breaker box just to make sure no one gets electrocuted or you don't set fire to the place. Martin wanted to follow up on the discussion last week of trying to fix a failed N64 advanced RGB mod installation. And Martin ended up going to pick up a different N64 because they wanted to anyway, and it turned out to be the exact same version. So it has the same DENC and US video encoder, which is great because now you have the perfect troubleshooting unit. And a bunch of the pins that were bridged together were also bridged together on the other one, which means they just share the same pads. Maybe they were all voltage. So if you tested to ground last time and it didn't tone out, then maybe those were all voltage pins, which is why they would look like they were bridged, but they actually weren't. They're just both connecting to power. So that's absolutely awesome. So then Martin went back and re-cleaned everything, removed some excess solder, and then let it dry for a few hours, powered it on, and it worked fine. One quick little interjection there. If you're using isopropyl and you're not doing something like a distilled water bath, which I really don't like doing, which wasn't what you did anyway, but when you're using isopropyl, if you hit it with some compressed air afterwards, and then you pretty much are good to go reasonably right away. You hit it with some compressed air. The other thing I like to do, like when I had a roach infested PS2 Slim that someone gave me, they didn't know it was roach infested. I like literally soaked it in isopropyl, scrubbed it with a brush. I had gloves on the whole time, of course, so the roach crap wasn't all over my hands, and then hit it with compressed air afterwards. And then I left it inside a window, but in direct sunlight. So you're still getting the UV rays hitting it. It's a little safer than just leaving it in direct sunlight, and it was about 10 minutes each side. So it was basically dry when I put it in the window. I hit it compressed air, I dabbed it with paper towels, and then leaving it in the window is not so much for the heat, it's the UV rays, just to get any microscopic bits of isopropyl that might have been stuck underneath something that hasn't quite evaporated yet. That was fine. And the tap test is always excellent. When you're done, pick it up and tap it hard against the side of your hand, and if you feel any kind of wetness or coolness come out, because with isopropyl, you might actually have the little bits hit your hand and evaporate right away, so you feel that coolness, then it needs more time. But I've never needed hours. Now, leaving it in a room for hours is not a bad thing, obviously. If anybody's running into this issue again, where they need to clean something out and they're afraid to power it on, that's always what I end up doing. And if it's at night and you can't, there's no UV rays, fine. Just keep doing the tap test every couple of minutes, tap it kind of hard, not hard enough to hurt yourself, but hard enough to jostle any of the isopropyl or liquids or anything. and that should do it. So everything seems to be working. Martin's going to go back and retry the installation again. And, I think at this point, Martin mentioned one takeaway from all of this is that you're obviously not skilled enough to solder components with multiple pins, but they're not giving up. And they'd like to think that maybe someday after a lot more practice, they could work with those as well. Yeah, you're not skilled enough last time you tried it. Maybe after all of this, you are. So it's certainly something worth trying, and I would absolutely spend some time on it. But yeah, glad to hear it. Let me know how it works out with everything else. And, I don't know why it didn't power on last time. Could have been the memory pack, could have been a lot of other things, but I'm just glad that it's all up and running now. 2 milligrams wanted to follow up again about the different types of transcoders and converters that go down to composite video. And this stuff is so hard to understand. In order to really grasp it, you have to have a full understanding of what's going on with the signals. And I totally get how confusing it could be. So I'm going to try one more time to try to clarify this one. I think the easiest thing to do is just to start by saying with Mr. again, anything that's designed specifically for Mr. will only work with Mr. and should be out of the rest of this conversation. It is worth noting that a lot of sellers who sell Mr. based equipment also sell the basic converters. I think I referred to them as generic converters, but what I actually meant was any red, green, blue sync signal to S-Video and composite. I didn't mean like a generic no-name brand or anything like that. So any of the Mr. stuff, a lot of Mr. sellers will sell both, and that could add to the confusion. Just for the record, I'm glad they sell both because there's different use cases. I'm not poo-pooing the sellers for doing that or anything. But so from the Mr. stuff, let's just separate it, right? Anything that's designed specifically for that will only work with it. And then the overall RGB to S-Video and composite converters, the ones that don't have a specific use case in mind. Maybe it's with Mr., maybe it's with other stuff. The way those work is they take the red, green, and blue raw signals, as well as the sync information, which could be presented as C-Sync, a composite sync of both H and V combined, which is what we get from consoles, or horizontal and vertical sync separated, which is what you get from PCs. Some will accept both, some will only accept one. It doesn't really matter. The point is they take red, green, blue, and the sync information, and they combine them together for S-Video for chroma and luma, the color information, and then the luminance and sync information on the other line. And that generally works fine. Sometimes it's not as good as dedicated S-Video from a console, but it's not usually something that would bother most people going to a CRT. And then going down to composite video, you also have the specific color information that needs to be presented in the right way so that when it's decoded by the televisions, it knows where to put all of that information without excess interference. So some devices out there do it better than others. There are some chipsets that work better for this. There are some bigger companies that used to sell equipment that probably uses better chipsets overall for it, but it will never ever be as good as dedicated composite video from a console because that's using multiple different signals off of the motherboard to sync all of the color information together to make a proper composite video signal. I could go down that rabbit hole for you, but it's going to just make things way more complicated. So I think it's the right thing to do in this scenario to say to get true composite video that looks the way it should from a console, it requires more than just the original red, green, blue sync lines. You need other information in there. People who are experts at video signals are mad at me for saying it that way. Everybody else, it's a very good way to visualize it just to make this better. Now, you do have some workarounds for the problem, like the one I was talking about from Ivory from Retro Castle, which is not for sale yet, which is why you don't see that one on RetroRGB linked or anything. I've had prototypes for a long time. I've helped Ivory work through some of the bugs on the basic stuff. But the way that kind of cheats is it has a variable capacitor that kind of works like a clock. You can't, once you spin it past a certain point, it goes back to noon or 12 and then keeps going. And that lets you cheat by dialing in what looks best to your eyes. It's not ever going to be as good as composite video generated directly from a console, but it cheats it in a way where just like how S-Video might not be exactly as good as what you come from a console, on a CRT it looks fine. And I think with this, I think you could say the same thing. It looks totally fine on a CRT, especially when you were looking for a conversion like that. So I guess if you really want to go down this rabbit hole and you want to have more of your questions answered, now you're going to have to start spending money, because I could explain it till I'm blue in the face, but until you start experimenting with your exact setup, you're not going to really know what works best. You could try to find that Kramer YCS or whatever it is, and see if it does the job for you. And this could be one of these things where if no one points out the problems, maybe your brain won't see it. So it's kind of like stuff like when you start digging into video signals, a lot of times people don't really notice until other people point out the problem. So maybe that's going to be fine. Maybe you could get converters, generic converters, once again, generic meaning a generic red, green, blue, and sync signal that go down to S-video and composite. You could try it. A lot of people who make these make different circuits around theirs, and one could certainly work better than the other. And more importantly, one might work better than the other for your setup, and it's just could be one of those things that you don't know until you try. There's also sellers that think that they have the right design and it's the exact same as everybody else's, and they're just trying their best. And that's why I would never name names in a scenario like that, because they're not ripping anybody off, because this should be something that's just regularly discussed. About going down to convert to these different signals is pretty hard. So there are a few more coming out that I will try, but the reason you don't see like a video or a one detailed post on this is because, sure, I might be able to dig up an old Kramer piece of hardware that pops up on eBay once every 6 months, but that's useless to everybody. No disrespect to you, but it's just that would be useless, right? To talk about something nobody could get that might solve your problem. So I'm waiting for something to come in stock that I've personally tested that I know will work in multiple different scenarios. The one from Retro Castle, which is not available yet, is definitely one of them. It's not perfect, but it's certainly one that would accomplish everything that we as gamers might need. Retro gamers, you're coming from a PC for this experiment, so that might not actually be for you because it's going to have a SCART input. So you should probably go through and talk with some of these different, or you said you've already talked to a bunch of these sellers, so now it's time to just buy one of them and try it, and kind of just go from there. You know, and once again, maybe this will work fine for you. Maybe it won't. Maybe you should just try a really cheap HDMI to composite converter, go to 480i and see what happens. Because maybe this whole thing is just not going to do what you want it to do. So it's a niche within a niche within a niche right here. So that's kind of why I'm trying to explain it out to see if I can get all the info out to you as possible. And yeah, you mentioned you could use Groovy MAME, Groovy Mister, and some LAN cables. That's an excellent way to do it, but that's equally as complicated in a different way. Lou covered that on his channel. If you want to go to Lou's Retro Source, you could check out a video on that. We covered it on RetroRGB a couple of times. That's certainly a great way to go about doing that, and it would totally work. And depending on your setup, it might be way easier, especially if you already have a computer with all of this stuff set up and you already have a Mister. Why bother trying one or the other? If the only thing would be the proximity between them, because you still need to plug your controllers into the PC itself. But yeah, and when that was first released, that Groovy Mister thing, a lot of people rolled their eyes like, oh, that's dumb. Why wouldn't you just connect it? Well, this is why, because, and I mean this with love, this is exactly why you might want to worry about something like this, is if you already have a Mister setup that's working, maybe this will be exactly what you're looking for. So let me know if I could talk about anything specific, but I think that, I read every word of your post, but I think I'm still kind of nailing the whole overall issue and how you need to go about solving it. I think this is just something that if you're still not, and I mean this with love, by the way, if you're not getting it, you got to just start buying stuff and test it. And my brain personally, very often, I could watch all the videos in the world. Unless I plug it in myself and start messing with it, I just don't get it most of the time. So by no means am I talking down to you or trying to be disrespectful. I'm just saying, nerds like us, sometimes we got to just dig our heels in and do it to see what happens. Next, Alan Ricks went to a thrift store today and they had 3 or 4 boxed little 5.5-inch black and white AM/FM TVs. They fondly remember using these when they were younger as their TV. And I had one of those too as a kid. We had, I think it was, I don't remember if it was 5.5 or if it was an 8-inch, but it was a black set with a black and white screen, and it had the antenna that pulled up. And I can't remember if it had a cable TV input in it or not. I vaguely remember plugging my NES into it at one point, but obviously it was black and white, so it was just more of like a fun try it out type of thing. And I loved it. It was just fun. It was heavy. I think it could have run off of AC power or a bunch of D batteries. I want to say six, maybe eight. I don't know, but it was neat and it was a fun thing to have. And if you wanted to play it with games, you could certainly play some Atari 2600 games on it, which would kind of be a little bit of a throwback, or maybe you could use it with emulation or Mister to play Game Boy on. Who knows? But the problem with those things is they never have inputs. So unless you use a modulator, there isn't a way for them to get a signal. And since they live in a city, that means that RF interference is going to be a problem. So is there any use for these things? Can you mod them? Can the tubes be used for other things, or is it just a waste? Those things that Alan found were new in box. So, and they were $8 each. So it seems like it would be fun to do something with at least one. Well, if you're in the US, pick up one for me. For $8 new in box, I'll pay to have it shipped to me as well and take a look at it. They're going to be mostly useless, but you could do a couple of different things. You could use the RF transmission stuff that I've been working on, which is going to be hit or miss. It's going to be a little bit laggy depending. You might be able, but once again, if you're in a city, then you're going to get a lot of interference. You might be able to do something like take it apart and then find where the antenna goes into the console itself, where it's wired into the motherboard itself, not the console, sorry. And you could potentially tap that so that you could screw an RF cable directly to it. So you'd still be using RF, but you would be connecting the quote unquote antenna as a cable. So you're still going to have more interference than you would in the middle of nowhere, but since it's a direct wire, it would actually be a lot better than if you were just trying to do it over the air. That example I posted again a couple of weeks ago still would pertain to you, but it's going to be better that way. And you could try to do stuff if you wanted to. If this is fun and important to you, you could try to do things like mod it so that you ground the RF shielding to the chassis as well, to the ground plane on the motherboard. And then so you have it going to maybe a VCR, and then you could have stuff going composite into the VCR to that. So there are ways that you could probably mess with it, but you're going to have to go into this knowing that you're going to dump a whole bunch of time and effort into a little black and white TV. So if you were doing so to play old black and white TV shows or play the Atari 2600, it might be a whole lot of fun and something that you might be willing to do. For me personally, I would probably take it apart and do a live stream with it just to see if I could do exactly that, and then box it up and give it to a friend for free. So, it's I think stuff like that is really neat. I just don't really have a use for it other than a fun little novelty type of thing. So yeah, I mean, the short answer again, you could probably try to mod it for direct coax input and hope that you don't get too much interference, build some shielding in and stuff like that. But that's not something you're going to have like a mod for where you could get composite video input into it. And if there is, it's going to be something like, it would have to be something like that model TV also offered a model with composite inputs, and it just wasn't populated on the board. So then you'd have to go find all of these chips from 30 or 40 years ago. And so, yeah, have very low expectations for this if you want to mess around with it. But overall, I think they're really fun. And one of the things I have, which I'll show here, I have that like from early 2000s, but that 1960s looking little CRT, and I leave it next to the speaker so that when people sit down to watch TV, that's like a fun little thing, like a display thing, and it works perfect. I'll leave a link to the live stream I did. That might actually have to be one of the things I end up selling, which it's surprisingly worth a lot of money. So I don't know if anybody would be interested in that, but yeah, I'll leave a link to that as well, just for fun. But I guess the reason I'm telling you that is to say, maybe for $8, have a cool thing to display on your shelf. And what's the worst thing that could happen? You decide, okay, it's taking up too much space one day, bring it back to the thrift store and just, give it to them or something, or give it to a friend. Or for $8, if I were you, I probably would pick one up, especially if it was new in box like that. Some bad news for anybody who supports on YouTube. I think that whole "this community isn't available" thing is because YouTube disabled community chats for everyone. I'm not really sure. Maybe this is something that they sent a notice out for, but to be honest, YouTube sends me like 50 emails a week, so I just delete them all. And it's mostly just trying to get me to sell you stuff that you have no interest in buying. So I just delete all those emails because I don't want to waste anybody's time. So if that's the case, that unfortunately means that people who support on YouTube aren't able to submit questions to these. And I don't know what to do. So I would love to ask for all of your opinions. Obviously, you'd have to just post in the comments, but I do read general comments every day, multiple times a day, because I just think it's a lot of cool conversations. But so I guess the easiest option is you could switch over to Ko-fi, Floatplane, or Patreon if that's how you would prefer to support. And if you're already supporting other creators there, maybe it's an easy switch. But for people that aren't signed up for those platforms, you want to just stick with YouTube. You're already signed up for it. I don't know. Does anybody have any suggestions? Does anybody have anything that, any ideas on how to solve this issue? Because that was just so easy. You just put your, supporter community comments right in the video, ask your questions there, you're done. So I don't know. Or is there a way to, honestly, I'm out of ideas here, and I feel like I'm letting people who support on YouTube down. So do you have any ideas? Is there anything you would like me to do that I could try to fix this? I wish there was an easy way to do it, but I don't think there's any. I don't even think there's APIs to integrate that. So I couldn't even just do a Q&A section of the website and have people log in. There's no way to, I don't think there's an API to integrate YouTube paid support with that. I think there is for Patreon. I don't think there is for Ko-fi or Floatplane or anything. So yeah, I don't know. I got nothing, and I'm really sorry. So any suggestions you have, I will take seriously, because I would love to solve this problem. Because anybody who supports, I would love for you to all feel like you could be part of these if you want to. And at the moment, people who support on YouTube are kind of getting screwed in that regard. So my apologies, and let me know what you think. Well, that's it for this week. Once again, sorry for having to record these a bit earlier. My schedule got kind of turned upside down this week, and I'm just trying to fit things in wherever I can. And I always like to do these Q&As with a clear head, so I could just give it my best effort. I never, ever, ever want to just like half-ass these and be like, oh, I'll just get it done. Like, no, I enjoy doing these, and I want to do them as a thank you. So it's never a get it done. I want to be in the moment. So I would rather take the time now to do them, where I could give these answers to the best of my ability, than just try to rush through it. That just feels disrespectful, and I wouldn't do that. So day earlier than usual. Hopefully that means people just have an extra day to get their questions in for next week if they'd like to. But as always, thank you to everybody who supports in absolutely any way. I do truly appreciate it. And hopefully we'll figure out a way for everybody now to resubmit questions, not just Patreon, Floatplane, and Ko-fi. But anyway, also, if anybody's watching on video, I've been updating the room a bit, and little by little, I'm getting things in. I don't have too much free time, so it's one of those, like, you set up a project, like you probably see the step stool. It's been there for a while. I'm not sure when I'll be able to actually finish what I was doing, but at some point, there'll be some videos out showing what I've been working on, and maybe eventually another fun, just a laid back room tour of how I've moved things around and evolved the setup over the years. But anyway, thanks to everybody who supports in absolutely any way, and I will see you all next week.